Hello, my name is Julia Plummer. I'm a professor of science education at Penn State University. I have a PhD in astronomy and education from the University of Michigan, and today I'll be talking about qualitative research methods. So in my talk today, I'll be giving a broad overview of qualitative research methods, focusing on some of the big ideas. In the process, I'll provide some examples from a study I'm currently in the process of writing up for publication, as well as some other examples from the field. This talk in no way will cover all of the ways one can engage in qualitative research in astronomy education, but I hope it gives you something to think about if you're either new to research or interested in learning more about qualitative research methods. So let me start by contrasting qualitative and quantitative research methodologies. This is just some broad strokes generalizations, and it may not represent all of the ways that we do qualitative and quantitative research. And also keep in mind that many studies combine these methods for a mixed methods approach. So qualitative research tends towards an insider point of view. It seeks to contextualize and understand participants' perspective rather than seeking to generalize findings. Qualitative inquiry tends to end with hypotheses and grounded theory rather than starting with a hypothesis. Qualitative research is often inductive rather than deductive. And qualitative research tends towards personal involvement, including many studies where the researcher is a participant in the study being studied. So let me look at why one would use qualitative methods in astronomy education. What are some studies that are particularly well suited to qualitative methods? First, let's look at studies of meaning. How do participants make sense of events, the world around them, or their lived experience? For example, in qualitative research, we might be interested in how amateur astronomers make sense of astronomical phenomena. Or we might wonder how graduate students' gender identity may inform their lived experience in an astronomy PhD program. Qualitative research studies are also particularly well suited to studies of context. How are events, actions, and human meaning making shaped by the unique context in which they occur? For example, in qualitative research, we might be interested in describing how the unique context of a planetarium environment might shape students' sense of the three-dimensional spatial world. Qualitative research studies are particularly well suited to studies of processes. What are the processes by which events, actions, and outcomes take place? In qualitative research, we might be just as interested in how students use models to learn about the seasons as the final learning outcome. And finally, qualitative research studies are particularly well suited to studies of causal explanations. How does X play a role in causing Y? And what processes connect X to Y? For example, in qualitative research, we might be interested in how and to what extent does a teacher's use of gestures play a role in prompting children's use of spatially accurate evidence during an investigation of the phases of the moon? So these are just examples of some of the purposes that we might put to qualitative research in astronomy education. But there's more to the field, but this hopefully gives you a sense. And to give you further sense, I want to give an example from my own research. And I'm going to give some background because I'm going to follow the same area of my research across my talk. This area of my research focuses on preschool age children, so children aged 3 to 5. And I'm interested in knowing more about how young children learn to construct explanations for astronomical phenomenon. So here we have some children learning about shadows. How does the sun produce shadows? And they have little flashlights representing the sun here. So I'm interested in what are the processes by which children engage in science practices in astronomy, and how do contextual factors shape their experiences? So the other children in their environment, the educator, the materials they have to construct these explanations. Next, I want to look at conceptual context. What are the underlying set of assumptions, beliefs, concepts, and theories that are guiding your research? These are things we need to ask in quantitative as well as qualitative research, but we should be thinking about whether or not our choices in a theoretical framework are well suited to our choice in doing a qualitative study. So for example, I am asking questions about how do I think children construct astronomy explanations in a preschool classroom and why? So I want to start my study drawing on theoretical and empirical literature to inform the design of my overall study. So in particular, in this study that I've described, I'm going to be drawing on a sociocultural learning theory that considers how children's community shapes the way they make sense of the world around them. And I'm also going to be drawing on another theory where I look at doing science through discourse and interaction. And in this theory, I look at how children learn to do science as practice. And I observe children's, not only their verbal interaction, but also their gestures and other multimodal interactions as they learn in community. And this informs my choices in research questions, choice of setting, the data that I collect, and how I analyze my data. So it should be all very connected. So let's look at those research questions and what kind of questions are suited to a qualitative research study. Often in qualitative research, we start with initial research questions to guide the study, but we refine those in the process of data collection and analysis. And rather than starting with firm research hypotheses that we're testing, we might start with research propositions, what we might theorize is going on, but we want to be open-minded and open to a broad set of outcomes and findings. We're going in trying to create new understanding from our participants, not knowing what they know, what meaning they make of the situation. So here's some common types of qualitative research questions to give you a sense of the type of questions you might encounter in a qualitative methods study. And I'm going to go through each of these three with some examples from my research. So for descriptive and theoretical, I'll give examples from my study with preschool age children. Descriptive questions look at what happened. So for example, what are the range of ways preschool age children co-construct science explanations in astronomy? So I want to describe the ways preschool age children are using evidence to construct explanations. And I say co-construct because I'm looking at how they're constructing explanations with the help of educators, of peers, and the materials in their environment. And I ask a theoretical question. So why did it happen? How can it be explained? When I ask, what features of the learning environment facilitate children's opportunities to construct explanations in astronomy? So now I'm looking at how did the educator help? How did the other children help? How did the materials help them construct those explanations? And for an interpretive question, these are questions that look at how are the people in your study, how are they making sense of events? And I'll draw an example from a study I published with my colleagues, Karen Schwartz and Krista Gent, where we looked at teachers going to the planetarium with their students. We asked, what are teachers' goals for their students during their visit to the planetarium? So we want to know the teacher's perspective. Next, I'm going to look at qualitative methods, and there are many ways one can conduct a qualitative study. I think one thing to always keep in mind is that you need rich, open-ended data sources for your study. And so I'm just going to give two examples from two of my studies to give you a sense of, what might rich data look like and how you might analyze that. So let's start with my study with preschool children. And I'm asking, what are the range of ways preschool age children co-construct science explanations in astronomy? So I'm looking at preschool children, so I need settings where they are having opportunities to explain astronomical phenomena. So I'm looking at settings in preschool classrooms, and I'm looking at museum settings where there's astronomy programs, and I want to look at different programs. So I looked at 4 different programs looking at 4 different astronomical phenomena: shadows, lunar craters, Mars landscapes, and phases of the moon. So I could get a range of phenomena, and each program was offered 3 different times. So I could have each program with a range of children to really have a rich data set to work with. And then how did I collect my data? I used video and audio because I didn't know how they'd be constructing their explanations. I wanted to really capture everything they were saying, everything they were doing, their gestures, their drawings, their use of the materials. So I'd set up multiple cameras in the classrooms to get multiple angles and hopefully, capture what was said and done during all of the work that was happening in the learning environment. And then to analyze my data, I've been using a couple of different programs. Currently, I'm using a program called Mosaic. There are different video analysis programs out there. This one allows you to, you can start by creating these tags for each of the codes of interest, things you're interested in finding in your video. I was interested in different types of explanations. So I've got 4 codes here: full, emerging, claim with reasoning, and claim only. And so every time I'd see one of those, I could tag it in the video and capture those instances in the video. But sometimes I have a lot of things that I'm interested in looking at. And so here's a very rich set of codes, lots of codes. And that means I can look at a single time point and see lots of different things happening, and I can construct patterns from that. And I can also construct patterns over time and see things changing over time during the program I was studying. Next, I'm going to do an example with children learning in a planetarium and a classroom. These are first grade students, so they're about 6 years old. This study asked how students' 3-dimensional learning of lunar phenomenon, so I'll focus actually on their learning of the apparent motion of the moon, how that changed from before to after a planetarium field trip and associated classroom lessons. This study was published with my collaborator, Kim Small, and we used a combination of qualitative and some quantitative methods, but I'm going to just look at our qualitative methodology here. So we started by doing interviews with the children before instruction, after instruction, and then a year later to see kind of a change, or did they keep using the same type of explanations. We audio recorded the interviews so that we could do a transcription to do a close analysis of their verbal responses, but we also asked the children to create drawings. And the drawings provided far more detail into their understanding of these lunar phenomenon than we would have gotten from just their verbal descriptions. So really think about, if you don't know what your participants already know, how are you going to get at those ideas? How can you provide them with opportunity to share their understanding, their meaning making? And so in this case, during the interview, having those drawings provided new insight into our participants' understanding. So I'm going to conclude by considering some final thoughts on limitations and biases in qualitative research. Consider your own biases and how that might shape your interpretations and conclusions. Think about whether you're really aligning your purpose, questions, theories, and methods. Be wary of overgeneralizing your findings. Qualitative research is highly contextualized. And then think about, why might your interpretations be wrong? How could you improve your interpretations? So maybe you need triangulation, collecting multiple data sources. So verbal interviews and drawings to compare. Maybe having another researcher review your data and do their own analysis to compare to your own, or share your findings with your participants and see if they agree with your conclusions. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I would welcome your questions. Feel free to get in touch. Have a wonderful day.